Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and corruption. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. Sometime in 1985, Moody devised a scheme to get his conviction overturned by bribing an acquaintance, Julie Lynn West, to give perjured testimony substantiating Moody's claim that the fictional Gene Wallace had placed the pipe bomb in Moody's home in Macon in 1972. Moody provided Lynn West, a young, destitute, wheelchair-bound woman, with a detailed scripted story shifting the blame to Gene Wallace. Moody paid West in small monthly installments as she learned Moody's written script, according to which Lynn West was to claim that she had been with Gene Wallace in Macon in 1972 and seen him place the bomb in Moody's home. So, and it wasn't me, it was the one-armed man, the famed refrain from The Fugitive becomes, it wasn't me, it was Gene Wallace. Welcome to Murdery Moody's Part 2. Where I'll be telling you the second part of the stories of Robert J. Moody, crackhead herald of extraterrestrials, and Walter Leroy Moody, the tri-state terrorist. Sources for this episode are the same as Part 1, and they're in the show notes. Since we finished with the tri-state terrorist on Thursday, I'm going to lead off with him today, and then we'll wrap up with the bizarre legal shenanigans of crackhead herald of extraterrestrials and heinous double murderer, Robert J. Moody. As strange as it sounds to say, the second part of Robert J's story is a lot weirder and more entertaining. I'm afraid to say more fun, but certainly more entertaining than Walter Leroy's. So that feels like the right place to finish up. Also, notice I said that this is part 2 of the Murdery Moodies. So, if you haven't heard part 1 yet, go back and listen to it and then rejoin us. We'll save you an aisle seat in first class. And now, if you're ready, I suggest that you put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you. Stow your carry-on in the overhead compartment. Let go of the cares of the day, but make sure your seatbelt is fastened. There's turbulence expected ahead. Kinda Murdery. The Murdery Moody's Part 2 starts now. If you'll recall from Thursday's episode, Walter Leroy Moody, the tri-state terrorist's 1989 murderous bombing campaign against the American federal legal system was inspired by his grievance against the justice system for giving him a 3-year prison sentence for nearly blowing up his wife with an improvised pipe bomb. Also, based on how often he seemed to target African Americans in the NAACP in particular, which has nothing really to do with the federal legal system, it seems like his bombings were most likely also inspired by deep personal racial hatred. But that's not exactly why we're telling this story. According to Moody himself, the grievance was inspired because of that 3-year prison sentence, as I just mentioned, that he got for nearly blowing up his wife with an improvised pipe bomb. You know, I have to say that the logical blinders that criminals often have throw me for a loop. I mean, sure, Robert J. Moody has an excuse for alien possession made me do it. He was a crackhead. But in the case of William Leroy Moody, and according to William Leroy Moody, his reason was that he was wrongly convicted by a corrupt federal court system of almost killing his wife with a pipe bomb. And if that were true, then Moody's logic essentially goes as follows. I, William Leroy Moody, am so furious at the justice system for sending me to prison for 3 years for making an illegal pipe bomb that nearly killed my wife, that I'm going to claim that some random guy actually built the pipe bomb and left it in my house, despite the fact that I won't be able to prove he exists. Notwithstanding that if he hated me enough to blow me up and was real, I'd probably have provable history with him. After all, I'm just a private citizen, not a government institution that's likely to be targeted by bomb-making madmen. So yeah, I'd probably have provable history with him. But I say I'm innocent, so now I'm going to be an aggrieved innocent man who didn't build the pipe bomb that almost blew up my house, and I'll carry out my vengeance by sending out several pipe bombs that are identical to the one I didn't build to blow up the luminaries in the justice system, or to blow up my wife in my house, or to blow up the car dealer who repossessed my car. I mean, wait a minute, what? The head spins, right? I mean, whoa. But anyhow, let's get to it. In May 1972, a pipe bomb had exploded, as I just alluded to, in Moodys' residence in Macon, Georgia. The bomb, which had been contained inside a package addressed to an automobile dealer who had repossessed Moodys' car, had exploded when opened by Moodys' then wife, seriously injuring her. Moody had been arrested and charged with the manufacture and possession of a pipe bomb. During his 1972 trial on those charges in federal court, Moody had taken the stand in his own defense and maintained that a man named Gene Wallace had secretly planted the bomb in Moody's home, allegedly to harm Moody. The jury found Moody guilty of possessing a pipe bomb, although it acquitted him of the charge of manufacturing it. Moody served 3 years in the federal penitentiary for the conviction. After he was released from prison, Moody became obsessed with overturning his conviction, believing that it tarnished his good name and that it stood in the way of his aspirations of becoming a lawyer. Several years before he went to prison, Moody had attended law school without finishing, and in the mid-1980s he inquired into resuming those studies. However, he learned that a felony conviction would disqualify him from practicing law in Georgia. In addition to seeing his conviction as standing between him and a legal career, Moody had convinced himself that he'd been unfairly convicted, that he was the victim of an immense conspiracy involving, in his mind, corrupt law enforcement officers, the trial judge, the prosecutor, and even his own appointed counsel. Moody's sense of aggrieved victimization fueled what was to become his long-running and continuing quarrel with the legal system, particularly with the federal courts in the 11th Circuit. Sometime in 1985, Moody devised a scheme to get his conviction overturned by bribing an acquaintance, Julie Lynn West, to give perjured testimony substantiating Moody's claim that the fictional Gene Wallace had placed the pipe bomb in Moody's home in Macon in 1972. Moody provided Lynn West, a young, destitute, wheelchair-bound woman, with a detailed scripted story shifting the blame to Gene Wallace. Moody paid Lynn West in small monthly installments as she learned Moody's written script, according to which Lynn West was to claim that she had been with Gene Wallace in Macon in 1972 and had seen him place the bomb in Moody's home. According to the script, Lynn West was also to maintain that she feared Gene Wallace would harm her if she had implicated him, but that after experiencing pangs of conscience, she'd finally come forward to help Moody clear his name. In September 1986, when he was satisfied that Lynn West had learned his scripted story, Moody filed a petition for a writ of error coram nobis in the federal district court in Macon, asking the court to vacate his 1972 conviction based on newly discovered evidence, i.e. the fabricated story placing the blame for the bombing on Gene Wallace. Lynn West's mother, Joanne Ekstrom, subsequently became involved in Moody's scheme, and she, too, agreed to give false testimony on his behalf. Following a hearing in March 1988, at which Lynn West and Ekstrom perjured themselves by reciting Moody's scripted story, the district court denied Moody's petition. Moody appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which affirmed the denial in June 1989. This final rejection precipitated Moody's war on the courts. It was the state's theory at trial that Moody became disillusioned with lawyers, judges, and other representatives of the legal system as a result of his contacts with that system, and that his inability to convince the courts that he had been wronged by the system led to the series of bombings that resulted in the death of Judge Vance. The evidence revealed that in the summer of 1989, Moody enlisted the help of his girlfriend, who later became his wife, Susan McBride Samford, to procure items necessary for him to construct explosive devices to use against the court and others. Moody initially dispatched Sanford on trips around the southeast to gather the components for a chemical project he was allegedly working on. In July 1989, however, Moody abandoned his chemical project. He then started the project that ultimately produced the tear gas bomb that exploded at the NAACP regional office in Atlanta in 1989. After the tear gas bombing, Moody pursued another project, again using Samford to procure the necessary components for him, sending her on numerous surreptitious missions to hardware and supply stores where Samford made purchases or shoplifted items as instructed by Moody. During this time, Moody sealed off the front bedroom of the Rex, Georgia residence he shared with Samford and gave her lists of items to procure. With these items, Moody then constructed 4 pipe bombs, including the pipe bombs that killed Robert Robinson and Judge Vance. At Moody's trial, Samford, Moody's wife, testified at length about her activities in gathering the components Moody used to make the pipe bombs and packages in which they were sent. Among the items Samford stated she procured for Moody were mailing labels of the same type used in the December 1989 pipe bombs, stamps like those on the packages containing the December 1989 pipe bombs, cardboard boxes, aluminum pie pans, goose-patterned paper towels, C batteries, flashlight bulbs, black latex paint, nails, string, brown wrapping paper, aluminum clothesline wire, like the heavy-gauge aluminum clothesline wire used in the same December 1989 pipe bombs, rubber bands, and tape. Samford's testimony indicated that after Moody finished his construction of the pipe bombs in early December 1989, he opened the bedroom in which he had been working and then thoroughly cleaned and remodeled it in order to erase evidence of his bomb making. He then mailed the bombs. According to Samford, after the FBI began investigating Moody's involvement in the December 1989 bombings, Moody remarked to her, "If they have any evidence, it would be DNA." On another occasion, in late December 1989, after seeing a television news report that a judge in Maryland had been injured by a pipe bomb, Moody told Samford something to the effect of, "That one's not mine," or "I didn't do that one." In addition to the incriminating testimony against Moody presented by Samford, there was eyewitness testimony indicating that on December 2, 1989, at a gun shop in Griffin, Georgia, Moody purchased 4 pounds of Hercules Red Dot brand smokeless gunpowder and an unusually large amount of CCI brand pistol primers, the kind of gunpowder and primer material that, according to forensic analysis, was used in the pipe bombs. The state's experts testified that there were numerous similarities between the pipe bomb that exploded in Moody's home in 1972 and the 4 December 1989 pipe bombs. They further testified that the bombs contained the signature of the same maker, indicating that they had all been made by the same person. The evidence also showed that the 1972 pipe bomb, like 3 of the 4 December 1989 pipe bombs, and like the August 1989 tear gas bomb, had been accompanied by a threatening note. The state also presented evidence showing that in February 1990, federal investigators recovered a steel pipe with threaded end caps during a search of a storage area that Moody was renting in Chamblee, Georgia. The device was similar in some respects to the 1972 pipe bomb and the December 1989 pipe bomb, and a forensic explosives expert testified that the device appeared to represent a transitional phase between the 1972 pipe bomb and those used in December of 1989. Carlene Shiver, a woman who had dated Moody in the early 1980s, testified that Moody owned a manual typewriter on which the letter A would jump. The state presented evidence demonstrating that each A appearing in a word on a typed death threat letter from Americans for Competent Federal Judicial Systems that was sent to Brenda Wood at the WAGA television station in Atlanta shortly after the pipe bomb killings jumped above the other letters in the word. Shiver also testified that Moody had once told her that a bombing was a perfect crime because when everything exploded, there was nothing left to investigate. That's an optimistic take, huh? During their investigation of the bombings, federal agents electronically monitored Moody's residence and the jail cell in which he was held after his arrest. The surveillance yielded several audio tapes on which Moody was heard whispering incriminating statements to himself. In one such, quote, conversation, unquote, Moody stated, "Now you've killed 2. Now you can't pull another bombin'." In another statement that he whispered to himself, Moody complained that the courts were crooks and that he had been the victim of a, quote, judicial raping, unquote. Moody then stated, "I'll guarantee you it'll never happen again. Now, you don't believe me? You're in for a rude awakening." In November 1990, Moody was charged with numerous federal crimes related to the bombings. The venue for the trial on those charges was changed to St. Paul, Minnesota. After a trial in June 1991, the jury found Moody guilty on 71 separate counts. He was sentenced to 7 life terms plus 400 years in the federal penitentiary. On April 19, 2018, just 4.5 years ago, Walter Leroy Moody was executed by lethal injection at the age of 83. He was the oldest inmate ever executed in the state of Alabama since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. And that's the story of Walter Leroy Moody, the tri-state terrorist. Phew, that was heavy. Let's get on to the crackhead herald of extraterrestrials, shall we? I'm of course referring to Robert J. Moody. If you'll recall, at the end of Robert J. Moody's story on Thursday, he was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to death. But then, the charges were remanded and the conviction was reversed. So just what the heck happened? Well, this is the story of the power of hating your attorney, and whether through true honest loathing or clever artifice, Robert J. Moody certainly hated his. Upon Robert J. Moody's return to Arizona, Deputy Public Defender Daniel Grills was appointed as his counsel. In May of 1994, Grills moved to withdraw, alleging that Moody had developed an obsessive hatred for his attorney and his attorney's staff, and a belief that his attorney was totally incapable of providing him with even minimally competent representation. Grills, this is the attorney, further claimed that he had exhausted all efforts to reconcile the conflict and had reached a firm decision that the situation was irreparable. The court perceived that Moody's disagreement with Grills was based on his lawyer's refusal to present or investigate his so-called, quote, alien defense, unquote, rather than with the lawyer personally. So in other words, the judge assumed that Moody didn't hate his lawyer personally, he just hated his lawyer because the lawyer would not pursue the extraterrestrial defense. Although the judge stated his opinion that this conflict would likely be present with any attorney appointed for the defendant, there is no record of a formal ruling on Grills' motion to withdraw. Because Grills continued with the representation, it's assumed that motion was denied. Then, on June 21, 1995, Grills filed a second motion to withdraw, stating that Moody had demanded his removal. Apparently, Moody threatened to file ethical complaints against both Grills and the public defender's office if he did not obtain new counsel. He expressed his frustration at his attorney's failure to interview any witnesses. He also stated that he had no trust in Grills and no confidence that the lawyer would act in his best interest. When the judge denied this motion, Robert J. Moody indicated that he would file a request to proceed pro se because of the court's refusal to appoint new counsel. In other words, Robert J. Moody wanted to represent himself. On July 5, 1995, Moody filed his motion for self-representation, claiming among other things that Grills willfully neglected to interview any of the state's or the defendant's witnesses, and that the, quote, trust essential to effective attorney-client relationship has been completely destroyed. He stated that he was being forced to accept the lawyer against his will. Ironically, Grills opposed the motion for Moody to represent himself, believing that any waiver was coercive under the circumstances. The court, however, granted the defendant's request, and Moody represented himself at trial. Grills was appointed as advisory counsel, but was later replaced by another public defender, John Seaman. At this point, as mentioned on Thursday, Moody was convicted on both counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. So why exactly was the conviction remanded and reversed? Well, on July 13, 1995, the court had a hearing on the motions in which Moody testified his desire to represent himself, and the judge found his waiver of counsel to be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. So the case proceeded to trial with Moody defending himself. An accused has a right under both federal and state constitutions to waive counsel and represent himself. However, as just stated, it must be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary, which the judge found that it was. However, in this particular case, the choices presented to Moody were either representation by a lawyer with whom he had completely fractured his relationship and had clearly an irreconcilable conflict, or self-representation. So, by refusing to appoint a new counsel, the trial court effectively left him no alternative but to represent himself, forcing Moody to choose a situation that was constitutionally impermissible because both alternatives resulted in a violation of his right to representation. And this is the reason that the conviction was reversed. So I realize this has all been fairly dry, and I promised you that the legal wrangling of Robert J. Moody would be entertaining, so where's the entertainment? Well, the entertainment lies in the elevated level of extreme conflict between Robert J. Moody and his attorney prior to the point at which Moody represented himself. Let's delve into those details a little bit. The record of this case is chock full of examples of deep and irreconcilable conflict between Robert J. Moody and his public defender, Attorney Grills. Moody's confidence in his attorney was shaken at the outset when an officer at the jail allegedly told him that if Grills was his attorney, he might as well plead guilty because the lawyer, quote, keeps his files in his shirt pocket. In addition, the defendant's assertions that he had been abducted by space aliens caused Grills to get angry with him and call him crazy, both to his face and to the press. When Grills disclosed 117 witnesses, the prosecutor moved for sanctions against him, claiming bad faith. The list of witnesses included former United States presidents and astronomer Carl Sagan. Grills provided address and phone information for only 5 of the persons on the list, and some were identified by first name only. Grills' response to the prosecutor's motion for sanction described the difficulties he was having with the defendant. He claimed that Moody insisted on the contents of the disclosure statement and that it was filed in an effort to regain his client's confidence by, quote, playing ball as the defendant would like it played. In other words, Grills said it was Moody's idea to call 117 people, including U.S. presidents, Carl Sagan, and people by their first names. Despite this explanation, the court found the disclosures fraudulent and ordered a good-faith supplemental pleading within 2 weeks. The strained relationship between Moody and his lawyer continued. Moody accused Grills and the lead public defender of being incompetent and crazy. He believed that the lawyers were conspiring with the prosecutor, the court, and the doctor to have him declared insane. Grills admitted yelling at his client, telling him that he did not care about his case, and threatening to quit if the defendant called the press. According to Grills, Moody developed an obsessive hatred for him and the public defender's office. Moody believed they were incapable of providing him with minimally competent representation. Grills stated that he and the defendant were almost at blows and were antagonistic towards each other. When Moody was found incompetent to stand trial, Grills allegedly had a party to celebrate. The conflict worsened after Moody was restored to competence. He continued to believe that his lawyer was ineffective. The witnesses had yet to be interviewed, and according to Moody, the attorney refused to meet with him. Meanwhile, Grills complained that his caseload was preventing him from preparing adequately for Moody's trial. Grills repeatedly informed the trial court that he believed his client would cooperate with a different attorney. During the hearing on the first motion to withdraw, he pleaded with the trial judge. Here's some of what he had to say. I've addressed personally my issue of this problem, and that he's not going to have any other attorney. Otherwise, I've tried to weather the storm, Your Honor. I've tried from day one. I just got off to a bad start. You recall the problem at the jail with the guards attacking my ability as an attorney way back in the proceedings. It's just degraded ever since then. I've made every effort, Your Honor. I made Mr. Moody aware countless times if there's a substitution that occurs that it's his last one, the last bite he gets at the apple. I think that alone will create incentive. But frankly, not to oversimplify it, just not have the name public defender after it. I know people that are on the contract list, and I can't think of one that wouldn't be able to get along better with him than me. Your Honor, he's focused on me 100%. Interesting aside, part of his thinking is that the next lawyer is predestined and he's not going to have any problems with him. I've told him this has been going on since day one, Your Honor, and I've in effect threatened him, saying, if you get another lawyer, that's going to be it. You don't get any more. But if there's 1,000 lawyers in Pima County, 999 of them will get along better with him than me. And that, my friends, is some serious lawyer shade. If there's 1,000 lawyers in Pima County, 999 of them will get along with him better than me. Wow. So we already know that Moody's initial conviction and sentence of death was reversed. But before the reversal, before the conviction in fact, on the last day of the trial when he was representing himself, the last day of the trial, which in fact was Moody's 37th birthday, he said to Judge Howard Hantman, "We've finally come to the point where I get my birthday wish. I hope you grant me the appropriate sentence to allow me to complete my mission," by which he meant sentence me to death so I can finish my job of being the crackhead herald of extraterrestrials. And on the day of his sentencing to death, Robert J. Moody, the one-time financial planner and real estate agent, showed no reaction to the sentence and spent much of the hearing smiling at the packed courtroom. Even though his conviction was reversed, Moody would go back on trial in 2010 and be convicted again of double murder. This time, though, he was not sentenced to death, but rather to life in prison. And in 2019, Robert J. Moody, crackhead herald of extraterrestrials, died in prison of an undisclosed illness. Shortly after his passing, the following letter was written to a newspaper in Tucson, and I have in fact found this same testimony in the official appeal documents surrounding Moody's case, so I think we can safely assume that it's true. Here's what the letter writer had to say. As a former deputy working in the courthouse, I was assigned along with others to guard Moody during his self-representation. Moody was allowed every day 8 full hours to use the phone and have legal access. The personnel specifically assigned to him were not allowed to write reports or speak of his calls or statements. As Evans' aside here, he essentially had attorney-client privilege with himself, so he could say or do whatever during his legal time, and the guards who observed it had to keep his secrets. So the letter written to the Tucson newspaper goes on to say, again, the personnel specifically assigned to him were not allowed to write reports or speak of his calls or statements. This is the former guard, I repeatedly heard him confess to these murders and stood by while he used his, quote, law time, unquote, that's what he called it, to call publishers and friends to whom he bragged about how he was beating the system, costing the taxpayers money, and buying time to embarrass the system. He even told me himself that he murdered the women because he was on a coke binge and needed money. I was bound by court orders not to repeat nor document these confessions. Judge Hantman followed all safe procedures to ensure a fair trial. So that's pretty wild, isn't it? I mean, that essentially shows that this whole space alien malarkey was just that, malarkey, and that Moody was convinced that he could successfully confound the justice system by forcing self-representation through waging war on his poor public defender. Wow, that is indeed one murdery Moody. All right, everybody, I'll see you again on Thursday, December 7th, for another kind of murdery story. In the meantime, please do remember the 3-digit lifeline number 988. Reach out to me if you'd like to connect, and always know that the world is a better place with you in it. Oh, and of course, you can reach me at kindofmurdery@gmail.com or at kindofmurdery on all social media. I'm Zevin Oldberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.